The TADC Episode 9 leak situation is getting worse every day.
How the fuck did we end up here? Hi, my name's Diddy Chiaki, or #1 Chiaki Nanami lover if you know me from TikTok. And a lot of my content on TikTok is based on critically analyzing different pieces of media, whether that be Arcane, or Dispatch, or Has Been Hotel, Undertale, Deltarune, or in this case, the amazing digital circus, aka TADC. And whilst I do make positive reviews of media, a lot of the time I'm more based in critique than anything. And I want to go off the bat and say that that's technically not my fault. The things I initially got into, I did because I liked them. It's not my fault they ended up becoming shit later on. And whilst TADC has unfortunately not become an exception to this pattern, there was a point in which I genuinely enjoyed the show. And yet, as the months went on, it seems that it has just had such a massive fall from grace. So, I want to look at where I think everything went wrong, both in controversies and in the writing. Now, before I even begin to utter a single not exactly positive word about the amazing digital circus, I would like to clarify, I have no interest in arguing with people who think the team behind TADC need to be white knighted against as if they're a bunch of teenagers when they're literally all in their 30s or up. I already know that YouTube does not play about any of these people and can get extremely feral over them. If you're one of those, we might as well part ways now because you're not going to listen to anything I have to say and you're not going to like it regardless, so bye! However, if you are interested in hearing a perspective that is not your own, regardless of whether you agree or not, then feel free to stick around. Now that hopefully everyone who that disclaimer has applied to has taken heed, let's get on to it. I've started speaking about TADC publicly on my TikTok around 2025 when episode 5 first came out. And in all fairness, even that wasn't so much about the show itself, but rather the reaction to characters from fandoms that I thought were a bit unfair and biased. But I think because my opinions of the show only really started blowing up around episode 7, people think that I hate the show and that I only think negatively of it, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Like with all the pieces of media I criticize, there has to be something that initially pushed me to get into that show in the first place, something that intrigued me, something that I thought was worthwhile. For Arcane, it's Arcane Season 1. For Has Been Hotel, it's the songs. And for TADC, I think episodes 1 to 4 were genuinely really good. And even episodes 5 and 6 are pretty alright and only really suffer in retrospect because the series doesn't follow up on what they lay out. The point is, as much as some people are convinced, I'm not a mindless hater. So with that being said, let's talk about some stuff that I actually really liked about TADC in the beginning. Going episode by episode, I think the pilot is the weakest out of all of my favorite episodes, which is fine. It's kind of like the entire point. You want the starting point to be the lowest so you can only go up. And even then, when I say lowest, it's not bad at all. It has a really interesting premise and mystery that gets people invested, a cast of characters that makes you want to learn more about them, bar Jax at least for me, but I'll talk about that later. And most importantly, I think Pomni serves as such a realistic main character. She's not a typical protagonist that's overly heroic and optimistic. She's just a normal human being who got put into an unthinkable situation and is trying everything to get out of it. And I'd have to argue that my favorite moment is when Ragatha is glitching out because of the abstraction and Pomni just leaves her. It's not something they had to include, but it's actually a really good way to create a morally gray action without making the character come off as unlikable. Unlike a certain purple bunny, cough cough. Yeah, as much as I did enjoy the pilot, Jax was almost the reason I wasn't gonna continue the show at all. And he's not even that bad here. It's more so the fact that I could read his character archetype like a book from a mile away. Let me guess, the purple buddy's mean because he's secretly super sad and the show's gonna act like this isn't incredibly obvious. Bonus points to the narrative keeps trying to get me to sympathize with him despite doing nothing to warrant it. Double bonus points that the fandom adores him and is super harsh to the female characters in comparison. And most importantly, I knew that the show was going to treat his story as inherently more important than anyone else's. And frankly, I'm tired of seeing these Tumblr sexy man wannabe characters getting all the attention whilst a cast of perfectly good women plus Zubul, who seem to have the potential for really interesting new stories, are just laid to the sidelines so we can do the mean dude is secretly sad archetype for the 100th time. But then episode 2 came around, and it wasn't Jax centered. It wasn't really centered on anyone but Pomni. And I was like, okay, Maybe I judged you too harshly, TADC. The entire sequence with Pomni and Gummy Goo is so well done, and just the concept of an NPC figuring out that he is an NPC and having this existential dread is really interesting. I also like how they didn't downplay or pull their punches on how awful Jax was. The fact that there were a bunch of Jax fans outraged because they convinced himself that his awful behavior in episode 1 was just him being a silly, funky little guy, just for episode 2 to come around and reinforce, no, he's awful, that's how you know you're doing something right. Because if there's anything I've learned about writing villains in the past few years, do not by any means try and make them seem less worse than they actually are. You will piss your audience off. I also like how Pomni is still hesitant with the members of the circus and isn't suddenly friends with them off camera. Something you'll notice in my critiques further on in this video is that I feel like the show kind of lacks consistency at times, but this is a really nice way to keep her character in line with what you've already established. And whilst I think the fandom overreacts to Ragatha infantilizing Pomni, I think she herself has a very reasonable reaction considering the circumstances. Honestly, throughout these earlier episodes, Pomni's personality is the thing that really appeals to me the most. Also, for a character I just met that episode, Gummy Goo getting popped out of existence almost sent me into an existential crisis. Thanks, Kane. Then we have episode 3, and here is where we're getting to peak. I love episode 3. Episode 3 and 4 are some of my favorites, actually are my favorites in the entire show, point blank period. It's kind of a universally loved episode because everyone loves Kinger, and honestly, yeah, me too. He's just such a warm and comforting character, and I am such a sucker for father figures, and his bond with Pomni is very nice and believable. I can understand that the same Pomni that was kind of snapping at Ragatha in episode 2 and ran away from her in episode 1 would be willing to open up and be comforted by Kinger before anyone else in the cast. More than I can believe her relationship with a certain purple bunny rabbit. Alas, another thing I really want to give this episode props for is its world building and mystery setup, which is weird to say because, to be honest, not much in this episode pays off later down the line other than Kinger being lucid in the dark. But I don't know, man. Even as someone who wasn't into the theory side of TADC, tell me you can watch this episode without your brain just whirring with ideas about how the future is gonna be. Regardless of actual follow-through, I have to give the show credit for creating such an interesting atmosphere. Speaking of payoff, I absolutely love the payoff of finding out what Kinger does when he holds his breath, which is glow. It is so beautiful, and that entire scene just gives me shivers every time I watch it. Having that scene at the beginning that initially feels like it's just gonna be a one-off and not have any real importance, just for it to come back with a vengeance at the end, a vengeance specifically against my emotions because I was crying like a baby. Beautiful. Chef's kiss. Oh yeah, Zubul and Kane are also in this episode. Honestly, there's not much to say about them other than the fact that this is obviously soft launching Kane's need for validation from the humans, but I do want to say when I initially watched this episode, I got such a stepdad trying desperately to appease his kid and stepkid just being absolutely done with his shit vibe from their dynamic. I'm not kidding. I genuinely thought it was going to be revealed that they were family in the real world and that Kane put them all into this ChatGPT simulator so that he could be closer to his kid. Probably would have been better than the explanation we got in the ending. What? Who said that? Moving on, episode 4. Again, another personal favorite of mine. And I think I truly love it for how creative it is because I genuinely thought for Gangle we were gonna go with your typical shy girl, can't make many friends, etc., which I didn't have an issue with, but to turn not only the entire episode but Gangle's very character design in and of itself into a metaphor for masking was so clever. I would have never thought of that. And this is always the episode I point to when I say, regardless of what issues I have with how the show panned out, Gooseworks clearly has a skill in writing nuanced, interesting character stories. And it's funny because from what I've seen, a lot of people don't like this episode, and I think it's because of the fact that not much lore happens in it other than Gummy Goo coming back. And I get it, but at the same time, I think if anything, the show needed more episodes like this, episodes that are just dedicated to fleshing out characters and their struggles. I think the show needed more episodes, point blank period, but that especially. And no, this being one of my favorite episodes has nothing to do with the fact that we intermittently cut to Jax being tortured throughout the episode. I have no idea what you're talking about. Listen, a girl's gotta take what she can get. Oh, and of course, how could I forget the absolutely stunning ending scene where Gangle runs out of the restaurant and gets hit by a truck. The buildup of tension, animation, the cinematography, all of it is so well done, and it's one of the reasons I'm surprised Gangle is as underrated as she is. People like to shrug her off, especially in conversations as to why she's not as important as the rest of the characters, and I'm just here thinking, how do you watch this and not instantly want to know so much more about this character? I guess it just comes down to personal preference, but I truly do believe that this scene is up there with the Pomni Kinger walking scene from the aforementioned episode. Also, something I didn't notice until rewatch, I always thought that episode 6 was the first time we saw Gangle smiling with her sad mask, but it's actually here after she runs into the road because her manic mask falls off. Just a fun little fact. But yeah, those are all of the things that I genuinely love about what I consider to be the peak of this show, episodes 1 to 4. And it's not like the episodes following are immediately ass right away, but I do feel like there is a noticeable decline in quality, and it just so happens to coincide with that stupid purple bunny getting more screen time. And I know, just by me saying that, a lot of people are gonna write off my criticisms as just being biased and a Jax hater, but you have to understand, it got to a point where I knew Jax was gonna have his own episode, and I was fine with that. I figured that was the whole formula. Each character gets their own episode dedicated to fleshing them out. And I know people love to act oblivious as to why Jax being a main character came out of nowhere to some people, but truly, can you sit there and watch the beginning episodes of this show and act as if it's not setting up an ensemble? So when Jax is getting so much attention and so much continuity with his specific story, to the point where it's coming to the detriment of every other character's writing, yeah, people aren't gonna like him. But we'll put a pin in that for now. Let's start talking about where I think the show has started to slowly lose its grip. The first time I started ever really feeling iffy about this show's writing was back in episode 5, particularly when it came to the treatment of Ragatha. Now at the time I mainly put the blame on the fandom for treating Ragatha so poorly, especially in comparison to Jax. But upon rewatch, I started to notice this episode is unreasonably harsh on her, no? Some things, yes, the fandom is just blowing out of proportion, like when Ragatha says that Jax doesn't have any friends, which he doesn't, and so the fandom treated it as her mask slipping and her evil, true, malicious intentions being revealed, when in reality, it was just a commentary of who Jax is as a person. Hey, he doesn't have any friends. Take a look around. But I don't know, man, it gets to a point where it feels like the episode is trying to punish Ragatha for some sort of unspoken egregious sin. Firstly, she has her extremely tragic backstory revealed in an awkward lore drop in which no one even attempts to give her the slightest bit of comfort, which is then followed by an insanely painful sequence of Ragatha trying to gain anyone's approval, and everyone just kind of shutting her down because they don't think she's genuine. And the cherry on top is Jax lying to Ragatha that she told Gangle to kill herself when on stupid sauce, which reasonably so causes her to be immensely panicked and distressed, a reaction that no doubt Jax was hoping to get. And to clarify, this is after she came out with how abusive her mother was. Like, minutes after. Who looks an abuse victim in the eye and is like, hey, I'm gonna verbally harass you so you can feel even worse about yourself? I'm biting my tongue now because I intend to have a whole segment about how much I hate Jax later on in the video, but I really need you guys to keep what I've just said in mind for what I'm about to say next, because the humiliation ritual doesn't end there. Later on in the episode, after finally getting provoked by Jax one too many times, Ragatha lashes out. She's at the end of her tether, and this pretty much comes directly after Pomni encourages Ragatha to be more open and honest with her negative emotions. So what does Pomni, who is both figuratively and literally in the middle of this, do after seeing Jax constantly provoke and harass Ragatha? She tells Ragatha to shut the fuck up and calm down. Okay, she doesn't say it like that, but god, the tonal whiplash is so strong that she might as well have. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong for Pomni to feel uncomfortable in that situation, but for her to know damn well just how awful of a person Jax is, because let's be honest, he threw her out of a bus in episode 2. That ignorance argument isn't working. And yet to only address Ragatha and try and get her to simmer down instead of addressing Jax is just so insane to me. Not only from a character perspective, but from a narrative perspective. Because up until this point, I assumed the whole message of this episode was that Ragatha needed to be more genuine with her emotions, otherwise she risked pushing people away and making them feel unloved, and yet the second she is genuine, the show also condemns her. So what can she do to win? If she can't be nice because it comes off as fake, if she can't be true because it comes off as uncomfortable, what the hell can Ragatha do to win? It feels so unnecessarily cruel, especially when it's obvious that Jax is her foil and gets so much woobifying and recognition from the narrative. We get to hold an AA meeting for the abusive purple bunny to make sure that no one's mean to him because quote-unquote, we all did bad things, but when Ragatha's clearly about to abstract in episode 5, it's fine for her to be abandoned by everyone because she committed the abhorrent crime of, let me just check my notes, trying to be nice. That'll get you 10 to life around here, Raggy. No, but seriously, it feels incredibly mean-spirited, almost like Gooseworks knew someone like Ragatha in real life, hated them, and decided to take it out on this fictional character she made. And it feels even worse when you consider non-diegetic factors such as Gooseworks claiming that this was supposed to be Ragatha's episode.
So that was a fucking lie.
Unfortunately, this would not be the last time Goose continued to play in our face when it came to our girl Ragatha. So yeah, honestly, I wish I could say I liked this episode more, but I just can't look past how Ragatha is treated in it. Like, call me sensitive, but I've never been a fan of the punching bag gag. In this episode specifically, Ragatha feels really adjacent to a character like Meg from Family Guy with how the show treats her here. And it's just a hard watch, man, especially because the show keeps trying to shove the guy who's making her suffer in my face. I don't want the stupid purple bunny rabbit! What else is there to even say? Intermission time was cool, really well animated. Kane is always great in this episode, and I'm extremely horny for Bartender Zubul. Now, in spite of everything I have just said about episode 5, it isn't the end of the series. There are still more episodes for them to rectify how they treated Ragatha, so maybe it'll be resolved in episode 6, said past Digi hopefully. Well, future Digi replied hesitantly. They kind of do and kind of don't. I thought the start of the episode showing that Ragatha and Pomni still clearly had some tension in their relationship when Ragatha rejects to be in Pomni's team was really good. But then they just don't speak for the rest of the episode. But I guess that's not so bad, right? They can just have their conversation in another episode. But they don't. They just don't. In fact, the next time Pomni and Ragatha have any kind of important interaction, it's in episode 9 and they're talking about Jax. And yeah, this is where another one of my big issues with the show comes into play. It lacks continuity. And what I mean by that is that very few things feel like they matter in this show. And sure, earlier on it's not that big of a deal because the stakes are pretty low, but as things start to ramp up, so should the significance of what you show us. In this entire 9-episode series, it feels like the only important things to take away were Kinger being lucid in the dark, Kane not understanding humans, and Jax being depressed. Obviously, you can have your main focuses, but if nothing else matters other than what I just mentioned, why even include the other things in the first place? It just feels like such an odd choice to have the episodes feel so self-contained for as long as they do, when this show is very evidently story-driven. Because it gets to a point where sometimes I feel like what I'm watching is just a waste if it's not gonna matter in the long run. And it makes me ask myself, why aren't we using this show's already limited time in a better manner? Now, episode 6 isn't the worst offender of this. I personally think it's episode 7, but nonetheless, Ragatha's relationship with Pomni, aka the literal protagonist, being off-screen like this, especially after episode 5 pretty much builds it all up, feels so odd. I mean, yeah, we get the Kinger and Ragatha talk out of it, and it is wholesome, but the core of episode 5 was clearly this divide between Ragatha, Pomni, and Jax, and that just, why were we subjected to that humiliation ritual for Ragatha if none of it was even gonna matter in the next episode? If all it was ever going to amount to was a pep talk from Kinger, of which we don't actually see how that affects Ragatha's behavior in the future, because the show effectively cuts her out from any type of narrative importance from this point on. I feel like there's so much that could have been done in this episode to justify the existence of episode 5 and everything that happens in it, but no, let's just squander it all and focus on this completely random friendship between Pomni and Jax. And oh my god, guys, they're singing Daisy Bell. Daisy Bell, Daisy Bell, don't you think they're best friends yet? Oh my god, don't you ship them? Don't you ship them? Don't you love them? No. Yeah, Pomni and Jax's relationship is another thing that bugs me about this episode because it just feels so out of nowhere. I feel like typically if your protagonist is going to hang around someone who is just inexplicably awful, you kind of have to at least make some kind of commentary out of it. I wholeheartedly thought it was going to be an escalation of the somewhat selfish behavior we saw her exhibit in earlier episodes, and like this idea of because she's such a thrill seeker, she'd be willing to pair up with someone like Jax, who is genuinely hurtful to everyone around him. And all episode, I was waiting for it to be revealed that these happy, cute moments they were having were only in their perception and everyone else kind of really hated them. And you can call me crazy for that, but this is the first episode that explicitly calls out just how abusive Jax is. For God's sakes, Gangle is terrified of what he'll do to her after she rejects him. In what world is that not abusive? And Zubul acknowledges this. So clearly it isn't just her overthinking. And of course we all know Ragatha's very valid and justified feelings about Jax, and yet no one really feels any any kind of way about Pomni hanging out with him. Now, the way it plays out in the episode, it's not necessarily her fault she kind of had to pair up with him, but I don't know, man. She seems particularly unperturbed about his extremely abusive behavior, of course until it gets turned on to her. And even then, there was still a really good chance for this to be a commentary on social situations like this in real life. Unfortunately, a lot of people will enable abusers because in their mind, as long as they're not hurting me, I don't care what they do. But not even that. I mean, the whole sequence for Pomni and Jack's fight is completely overshadowed by the obvious underlining of, oh, Jax is secretly sad, wah wah wah. That hits you with all the subtlety of a brick to the face. It almost feels like they're dangling it over our heads for some sense of deniability. Hey, you can't say that we baby Jax. We had Gangle call out how awful he was that one time. Did it have any impact on the story or how the characters perceive him? Not really, but we still did it, so. Yeah, that's the perfect way to describe it in a nutshell. Jax is abusive, but it doesn't change anything about the story. Because when Ragatha is upset that him and Pomni are hanging out, it's not because she's been getting verbally harassed by this man for God knows how long. No, she's just jealous. And when Gangle has a crystal clear admission of being abused by him, well, it's so isolated and removed from the actual story that it doesn't really matter. And of course, when Jax eventually tries to turn his emotional abuse onto Pomni because he's not a big enough boy to handle his own feelings, well, we don't even get enough time to start feeling bad for Pomni because the show threatens to hit us over the head with a bat if we don't extend our sympathy to Jax instead. Figuratively, of course. I know I said I was going to talk about how much I hate Jax in a separate part of this video, but honestly, he's kind of integral to all of the flaws of this show, so I think I don't have a choice but to also talk about it here. And it's funny because when I initially watched episode 6, even though I felt it a bit lackluster on the continuity front, I originally praised its willingness to confirm in their own words that Jax was an abuser. Because I think we need more abusers like Jax. Abusers that aren't just simply one-dimensional evil hell monsters that are born that way. Abusers that are complex, that have mental health issues of their own, that have trauma but are still abusive nonetheless. But looking back at it now, especially with the trajectory this show chose to take, it just feels like the starting point in a long laundry list of instances where Jax's trauma and depression is used to lessen the severity of his actions. So for me personally, when it comes to this show's quality, episode 6 was definitely the beginning of the end. A symbol of the fact that this show was about to sacrifice every interesting character that isn't Jax so that Jax can have more of a boring, pathetic, entirely predictable storyline. But it isn't as bad as episode 7. Considering that this episode is 2 away from the finale, what important things do we learn? What crucial, significant information is being given to us as the end of our show is right around the bend? Well, we learned that Cain doesn't really understand humans and wants to be approved by them, but we knew that from episode 2. We learn about Abel, sure, but nothing substantial. All of that important information comes in episode 8. We learn that Kinger is a CNA employee, and for some reason, no one's bothered by that. I kid you not, when I first watched this episode, I had to actually look up whether or not it had been revealed already because everyone was acting so cool and calm about it. Dude, he just admitted to making Cain, the entity that's kind of ruining all of our lives. None of you are at least gonna interrogate him a little bit? No, seriously, if I'm misunderstanding something about this, please tell me. I'm actually baffled. Anyways, we learned that Cain can control minds, or at least influence them. That's important, right? No, it isn't, because it literally never gets brought up again. That entire last sequence, despite having so much hype build up for it, is pretty much inconsequential in the following 2 episodes. The debate about whether or not Jax pressed the button or whether Cain made him is null because no one even considers the fact that Cain can influence minds anymore. In fact, no one actually cares about Jax fully intending to keep them all trapped in there for eternity at all. Regardless of what the outcome would have been and regardless of how panicked Jax was, he actively took all of their autonomy and perceived freedom away. I mean, Zubal's upset for the entirety of like 30 seconds before they're instantly shut down by the narrative and told that it's not that deep, which contextually brings us one of the worst lines ever spoken by a character in this show. The cliffhanger with Kinger bringing up the first abstraction doesn't really matter that much. All it really serves to do is a segue into Kinger's flashback where Queenie abstracts, and then it gets like a brief cameo in episode 9 as well. But I stand by the fact if you straight up remove this episode, you'd only have to make minor tweaks tweaks to the previous and following ones, and everything would still flow. If anything, it'd probably be better because I'd be spared from ever having to hear Pomni utter the words,
"We've all done bad things,"
ever again. Honestly, I just can't wrap my head around this episode. We're in the final stretch, and here's this episode that is seemingly about nothing, which obviously means it's gonna have a crap ton of secrets hidden. Oh no, it's actually about nothing. You know that one episode in Steven Universe's final season where you think it's just gonna be Steven and Pearl fucking around with the lost phone in the literal final season, but then it hits you with the biggest reveal of the entire series out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, the unassuming title and premise was just a facade to segue into shit getting real. Yeah, episode 7 is that if there was no big reveal and it really just was Steven and Pearl fucking around with a lost phone. And what's crazy is because it wants to LARP as if the information in it is even remotely important, you don't realize how utterly worthless it is until the next episode comes out. And considering these episodes tend to have a 3-month time gap at minimum, yeah, most people aren't even gonna remember what happened in episode 7 unless they're rewatching the entire series again every time a new episode comes out, which they're probably not. Which pretty much explains why the show gets away with lacking so much continuity between episodes. Considering the time it took for a new episode of TADC could be anywhere from a few months to a year at least, it's not crazy to imagine that by the time a new one rolls around, people are just going off of the vibe they got from the last episode and not the actual information. And I want to clarify, this is not me shitting on Glitch for taking a long time to release episodes. I understand that animation is a lot of hard work. I'm just saying it conveniently worked out for them. Anyways, where was I? Episode 7. Nothing of worth. Nothing justifies this episode existing in the manner that it did. Yeah, Kane is desperate for approval. We knew that. Yeah, Jax has bad mental health. We knew that. We learn Abel exists. That is literally all. Any important information about him is given to us in episode 8. It's also confirmed that Kinger is a CNA employee, but nobody really cares. Also, dialogue that's coming from anyone that isn't Kane, Jax, or Abel in this episode feels so weird and robotic. Some people started theorizing that Pomni was an AI after episode 8, and that's why we don't know anything personal about her. But honestly, Homegirl had me feeling like she was ChatGPT reincarnated with her stale-ass dialogue in this episode. Episode 8. Is it any better? Well, it kind of has to be by process of elimination, because episode 7 is a literal bottom of the barrel, second only to the final episode. I'll get to that later. But yeah, episode 8 is fine, I guess. I actually really like the opening. Not only is it just like a pretty visually appealing scene, I love nonverbal storytelling, and this practically tells us the entire story of Cain and Abel without a single word uttered. And in fact, it's so good, it actually makes episode 7 look even more useless. We learn more about Abel in these first few opening minutes than we did the entirety of that episode. Like, man, what a beautiful opening sequence. I really hope it isn't followed by the characters having a sit down that effectively erases all of the stakes at the end of the previous episode so that they can effectively tell the audience to not be mad at Jax and to just get over it. Especially not in a way that it feels like it comes at the expense of all of the female characters plus Zubal's realism. I really hope that doesn't happen. That would be awful. Yeah, this scene is the worst in the entire show. It's just bullshit. The entire thing is just bullshit. Jax blatantly gaslighting Zubal and saying that they have no reason to be mad because none of it was real anyways is expected. But for them to have Gangle jump onto his contrarian ass and be like, no, yeah, actually there's no reason to be upset is fucking insane. Jax is obviously not arguing in good faith here. His argument is like saying, hey, I tried to shoot you but I missed, so you can't press charges against me. Nigga, are you crazy? You're going to jail! And do not even get me started on Pomni's enabler ass talking about some, we all did bad things. Whole time, she's sitting next to the two most morally pure people in the entire circus. I mean, yeah, I know he's an abuser, but Ragatha, you were mean that one time, so we all did bad things. The whole thing just reeks of, hey, we had an actually interesting moral dilemma at the end of our episode, but we're just gonna move past it as quick as possible because we can't fathom giving our favorite little ooh boy consequences that last for even longer than a minute. Now, putting how much Jax is babied aside, it's still crazy from a narrative perspective. Not only did you confirm this massive reveal, Kang can control people's minds at least to some extent, you just name dropped the first abstraction and we're not gonna do anything with that. All he's gonna be is a cameo in Kinger's flashback. And then Pomni comes to the conclusion that they need to accept living there and everyone's chill about it out of nowhere other than Zubal. Honestly, Zubal should have been the protag. And this is what I mean when I say the characters feel flat. The characters don't have realistic reactions to anything anymore. They just take the punches as they come. They feel like NPCs. Oh, Kinger made Kane? I guess that's okay. Oh, Jax chose to keep us trapped here for eternity because he was having a panic attack? I guess that's okay. Oh, we should abandon any hope of getting back to our regular lives and just accept being trapped here? Okay. I mean, you guys heard me at the start of this video. One of the reasons I loved Pomni as a protagonist was because she felt so realistic. But now it just feels like she's Jax's therapy dog that occasionally spits out motivational quotes at the group. And it doesn't feel like a natural progression. If anything, it feels like someone replaced her off screen with an entirely different character the second she realized Jax was still sad in episode 6. And ever since then, her character has been reduced to revolving around making sure Jax is okay. But honestly, most of these characters died in episode 6. Episode 8 was just the autopsy arriving to confirm that they're truly dead and gone. But not Kane. Kane was good. Do I wish his descent into insanity had a slower transition? Yes. Do I also think the parallels to Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream are a bit on the nose and pretty undeserved? Also yes. But honestly, looking at the rest of this cast at this point, he's the best we're gonna get in terms of development. I don't know why Bubbles started talking shit to him out of nowhere. That felt a little forced, but whatever. Slightly off topic, there's a reprise of The One Who's Running the Show in one of Glitch's adverts. And one of the verses in it is really good. I wish they would have put it in the actual song. It goes, "You could have everything if you would just give up and love me." And it's such a good lyric and feels so much more fitting with Kane's general character trajectory than him suddenly having a massive ego, but that's just my personal opinion. Regardless, I still like the song. It's really catchy and I love the visuals for it. Oh, also, I really like the torture sequences later on in the episode. I actually had quite a bit of fun breaking them down. Ragatha's makes my heart drop so badly, like, oh my god, my baby. But Jax's makes me laugh, so it balances out. Back to Kane. For what it's worth, they do such a good job at making him intimidating here. My heart skipped a beat when he said, "Where's Kinger?" That was so well done for what? Oh my god. And one of my favorite character tropes is omnipotent being that has the mindset of a tantruming child. And Kane here fits the bill pretty perfectly. It makes her such an unsettling and off-putting villain. There was a moment when I was watching the episode and it actively hit me that Kane was taking out his anger on the people in the circus, and that just made my stomach drop. And the cliffhanger just left me even more excited for the trajectory of his character, because I'm gonna be honest, I knew he wasn't gonna be gone forever. And despite how certain parts of the episode dampened my mood, that overall was enough to get me hyped for the final episode. So did episode 9 live up to the hype or not? No, not even close. God, where do I even begin with this finale? I guess there's nowhere better to start than the start. I like the fact that the episode pretty much opens up the same way episode 1 does with the theme song, except it's laggy and empty, signifying that Kane is no longer there. Unfortunately, I think that's where everything I like about this episode ends. After that, we're pretty much where we left off, Jax having a go at Kinger for accidentally deleting Kane. I will say, I'm at least glad that someone is having a realistic reaction to this. Minus 100 points for it being the fucking purple scum of the earth, but hey, at least it's something. Kinger proceeds to exposition that the reason they're in here is because they're brain scans of real people. Anything that isn't a Jax mental breakdown is completely speed ran through in this episode. And a lot of people are being blatantly disingenuous, arguing that Cain and Abel was never an important part of the story, but like, it blatantly was. The show obviously kept theory baiting about it, from Jax having a Cain and Abel gun in episode 6, to Cain fawning over pictures of the Macroverse in episode 7. Hell, just the existence of episode 7 and the importance it puts on Abel when it really didn't have to. The episode that literally opens alluding to the origins of Cain and Abel, the AIs from the company. I just don't understand the point of building this all up to be a massive mystery, Cain and Abel, the Abel AI, if you're gonna answer it in the most unceremonious way ever. Random AOT reference, but Rhina literally admitted that he was the attack titan in the background of another character's conversation, and even that was more hype than this. That's a bit unfair though. TADC versus AOT is a bit of a coughing baby versus hydrogen bomb situation. Anyways, Jax, as expected, hears the news and proceeds to be awful to everyone because that's the only character trait he has besides being upset. He also makes a joke about Ragatha being stuck with her extremely abusive mother.
I guess you still get to hang out with mommy after all, right, Rags? Congratulations!
I don't care how depressed and traumatized he is, Jax couldn't abstract fast enough, which is crazy because he abstracts like 5 minutes into the episode. Spoiler alert. Pomni then tries to comfort a crying Ragatha, and as much as I love to see Ragatha finally getting treated with some humanity in this show, I just don't buy it. This episode desperately wants me to believe that Pomni and Ragatha have this really close bond, but they don't, right? First of all, these two barely talk, and when they do, it is the most surface level bullshit therapy talk ever, or it is just straight up about another character, typically a man. this show does not put nearly enough work in to actually build up Pomni and Ragatha's bond to make me believe that they deserve all of these suddenly sympathetic moments. But there's also the fact that Pomni has been constantly trying to cozy up to Jack, who I'd argue is very much Ragatha's abuser. I mean, god, did y'all see how he unloaded that entire clip into her head for her mildly bruising his ego? And yet Pomni makes no attempts to really call it out or even react to it when she sees it, which makes it really hard for me to believe that her and Ragatha have even a remotely close bond. And I think this is a bigger reason as to why Pomni fails as an empathetic character as a whole. It's the intolerance-tolerance paradox. By being tolerant to the intolerant, you're being intolerant to the victims of that person's intolerance. Or to put it simply, here's an example. If a person is tolerant to racists, they're then inherently being intolerant to people of color, even if they're not explicitly saying so. In the same way, Pomni being tolerant to Jax kind of makes her inherently intolerant to Ragatha, Gangle, and anyone who's a victim of him. And whilst this isn't an angle that the show wants to acknowledge itself, it's something that fundamentally stops me from buying any genuine moment that tries to happen between Pomni and Ragatha. Like when she says Ragatha is her closest friend. Girl, not you trying to booty call Ragatha because your boy toy is dead. Don't even start. Actually, 2 of her boy toys are dead. I mean, I personally would have went for Zubul after that, but hey, process of elimination. Insert mandatory Kinger and Pomni therapy talk. It's fine. I don't feel as strongly about their bond and dynamic here as I did in episode 3, but it's fine. And then Pomni learns how to make stuff with her mind like Kinger does, which was foreshadowed in episode 6. I just wish that the characters had this finale to themselves instead of having to share it with Jax's mindscape and backstory. This could have been a nice way to signify them accepting peace in the circus. Them slowly struggling with creating stuff, and when they finally learn how to make it, it signifies that they have accepted their new lives here. But unfortunately, this allegedly character-driven show doesn't have any actual time for character-driven moments, so it's reduced to a montage. Then Jax abstracts! Let's fucking go! When I first saw this scene, I thought, oh, Kane isn't here, the abstractions are running loose. And then I heard the word Jax, and I think I just blissed out in euphoria. I was so happy. Now, from a hater perspective, this is the best scene in the entire show. From a narrative one, though, listen, I was the first to say this was a ballsy, bold move. To kill off the fan favorite off screen in the first, 5 minutes of the show, I gotta give you your ones for that. But once you get past the initial happiness of Jax abstracting and realize that a significant portion of the episode is still dedicated to him, that dread just kicks back in, because not only is it now the Jax show, it's a Jax show in his mind, which means nothing that happens here has any real impact on the actual plot. Listen, we all knew this finale was going to heavily center around Jax when we saw the trailer, but I at least thought that he'd be progressing, but I didn't think we'd spend a good chunk of our final episode being entirely stagnant in time because we're just looking deeper into Jax's psyche, learning things that we honestly already knew, and getting a backstory? A backstory episode in your finale is kind of crazy. And how does this happen, you might ask? Well, apparently, Pomni can touch abstractions and go into their mind by doing so. And it just comes out of nowhere, which is crazy to say considering how big of a threat abstraction has been this whole time. And it wouldn't be hard at all to implement this as a factor earlier on in the show. Kinger had a wife who abstracted right in front of him. Maybe in one of his generic therapy talks with Pomni, he mentions the fact that he once touched her and went into her mind as well, but nope. Let's just create a random ass pull in our final episode and hope that no one pays attention because it looks really pretty. Oh my god, it really is Arcane Season 2 all over again. Anyways, now Pomni is in Jax's psyche, which leads to her learning never before heard of revelations about Jax, such as he uses facades to hide his true personality because he's scared. He uses the cartoon archetype to try and detach himself from his real feelings. He hurts other people first before they can hurt him. And he's weird about Gangle. Hey, post-editing Digi here. Pardon my laziness, but I figured I'd elaborate on my thoughts with this scene because it seems to be one of the only 2 things people find worth in talking about from this finale, the other being Jax's gender identity. The way I perceive this scene is another one of Jax's coping mechanisms, specifically exerting dominance over people more vulnerable than him so he can feel like he's in control. Pretty simple, right? But I think the discourse is stemming from people being uncomfortable with the scene and then people telling them they're stupid for being uncomfortable with it because it happens in Jax's head, blah blah blah. But two things can be true at the same time. Yes, this happens exclusively in Jax's psyche, but it's not as if he hasn't spent the entirety of the show blatantly stepping over Gangle's boundaries without a care in the world, to the point where, depending on the nature of Gangle's drawings, Jax's constant blackmail of her with them could constitute sexual harassment. Now, that's not inherently an issue from a writing perspective, but where it starts getting tricky is that the show can't decide whether or not Jax's treatment of Gangle is haha funny lame weeb shit or genuinely mentally damaging to her. Like in one episode, you think they're just making a reference to the MLP cum jar, but the next few episodes, Gangle's genuinely breaking down, terrified of how Jax is gonna punish her for rejecting him. And that'd be fine progress, but this scene feels like it blurs those lines all over again. At least that's my take on it. Wow, thank you so much for repeating stuff we definitely didn't know about Jax already in a finale that's already on a tight time crunch. That's wonderful. No, really though, these scenes are all very unnecessary. The show could have just gone straight into the Ribbit flashback. I mean, that's what everyone's here for, right? Which brings me to the next topic. Ribbit, a character that has been elusively haunting at least Jax's narrative ever since episode 5. So, does she live up to the hype? What do you think? Ribbit is essentially a walking plot device for us to be able to hear Jax's traumatic backstory through, and then to be subjected to Jax's emotional abuse shortly thereafter. And whilst I'm not too surprised considering she shows up with 30 minutes left in the finale, I am a bit confused about the choice to have her character exist at all, because she's just Ragatha, except a little cooler. Two women who at some point used to have a positive relationship with Jax until he turned on them because insecurities and trauma. And here's the thing, if Ribbit's abstraction was the reason why Jax acted the way he did, then I'd understand why she existed. But it's not, because Jax is awful to Ribbit before she abstracts. Arguably, he pushes her into abstraction. No, it's clear that his heinous behavior stems from 1, his trauma, and 2, his gender identity issues, which I'll get into later. So it just makes Ribbit feel redundant as a character. At this point, axing Ribbit as a character entirely and having Ragatha take her role would not only solve the issue of Ragatha being extremely underdeveloped, but it would also save this show from having to invent another female character that exists purely to be a plot device for Jax's sake. Boom! 2 birds with 1 stone type shit. But I guess the show just hates Ragatha that much that it would rather conceive a new character entirely to fill a role that she could perfectly do so on her own. Whatever, Jax emotionally abuses and gaslights Ribbit into abstracting, then Kaufmo also abstracts, which means he now has a body count of 3. And then Pomni hugs him as he's about to abstract. I couldn't give less of a fuck. And I want to preface this by saying it is entirely possible to make a character that is awful and yet somehow manage to garner some kind of sick, twisted sympathy from you. For example, BoJack Horseman, Clark from the Backrooms, Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. All characters that are objectively horrible and yet you still can't help but feel a little bit bad for them at their lowest. So this is not me and other people being unable to handle morally complex characters, it's just that Jax sucks at doing that. And that's more to do with the fact that the show preemptively tries to make you empathize with Jax whenever he does something bad, especially post episode 5. It's almost as if when you try and force your audience to feel some kind of way about a character that's clearly antagonistic, you risk pushing them in the exact opposite direction. For other examples of this, see Caitlin Cameron from Arcane Season 2 and Invisigal from Dispatch. Anyways, Jax abstracts and then a montage of him starts to play to Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder. And it is just a mindfuck and a half. First of all, the visuals are really uninspired, which surprised me because that's the best thing about the show, the visuals, and yet it feels like this was slapped together on CapCut, and I should know, I'm the queen of slapping things together on CapCut. But also, are you rage baiting me? Is she lovely? No! When the leaks came out and there was a debate about whether or not they were fake, I was certain they weren't because I knew it wasn't feasible for Glitch to create a whole separate movie just for the sake of it, but there was a doubt in my mind, and it was this montage because it straight up seems like satire. Forget the past 8 episodes, we just saw Jax berate Ribbit into her death. Why are you rage baiting me, Gooseworks? And I get it, it's a part of the alluding to the trans femme coding of Jax, but surely there are more fitting songs with feminine pronouns, right? Hi, me again. I also forgot to mention that it's a non-black cover of the song. If you don't know, Stevie Wonder is a black man, and this is most likely because they couldn't afford the original, but considering all the anti-black controversy the show has gotten itself into, I think the idea that they didn't want a black person speaking in the show for more than 3 lines is really funny, and it's my personal headcanon. Oh, on the topic of trans femme Jax, I guess that's something I should discuss. People have asked me my opinions on it on TikTok, and I'll be honest, it's not really my place to have an opinion. I 100% see where the interpretation comes from, and I definitely think it was intended by Gooseworks. Although when we start arguing speaking about pure canonicity, that's where this being the most subtle thing about Jax's entire backstory comes into play. Because one of the risks of not saying something explicitly is that once it's out of your hands, you don't really get to control how fans choose to interpret it, and that is the case for this. If someone doesn't necessarily see Jax as trans femme, I don't think you can argue that they're being transphobic. Now, if they're intentionally denying that there's any allusion to it, yeah, they're being bad faith. But them merely having a different interpretation, unfortunately, isn't enough to call them bigoted in my book, at least. Especially considering that I don't believe censorship is at play here, so if they wanted to explicitly say that Jax was trans, Gooseworks could've, but she didn't, implying that for one reason or another, she willingly chose for it to be ambiguous. And I mean, there is already an explicitly trans character in the show, Zubul, so furthermore proof that if they wanted to, they would. As for me, if you couldn't tell this far into the video, obviously I've been referring to Jax as he, him, and a man. Firstly, because that's all he's ever referred to as in the show, but also to highlight the underlying misogyny in how he is treated compared to the rest of the cast that is mainly women plus Zubul. I will say though, I'm glad that the people who are initially theorizing Jax to be trans and who are getting hated on because of it have got their comeuppance. Like, y'all deserve that. Trans theories, headcanons, whatever should never get anyone that pissed, especially from a show coming from a trans woman, so I'm glad that y'all get to bask in this, cause you deserve it. Ha 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 ha, me again. I promise it's the last time. It's probably not. Kind of disregard everything I just said. Gooseworks confirmed that Jax was trans on her blue sky. Okay, don't disregard it, but take it with a grain of salt. I still personally stand on the fact that it doesn't really change anything about his character to me, and I still think there is an underlining of misogyny in how he's written. I'm not here to debate about it though, because he's trans femme point blank period, although I'll talk about Gooseworks' tendency to confirm things outside of her show later on in the video. But what I want to talk about right now is how this has genuinely caused the fandom to implode, probably because there's nothing else interesting enough to talk about from this finale, but also everyone's being so black and white about this. It's either there was never any indication that Jax was trans and this is just a last-ditch attempt to try and make us feel bad for him, or it's Jax being trans was obvious from the first second he stepped on screen, and if you didn't get it, you're an idiot. And listen, when you're arguing with people, it's very easy to write off everyone but you as stupid, but unfortunately that's almost never the case. So I'm gonna do something crazy here and propose a little more of a nuanced take. Maybe, just maybe, if you yourself are trans, you are more likely to clock the coding of Jax in the earlier episodes, thus making you more likely to accept Jax being trans as the only way to interpret Ribbit giving him the bow. On the other hand, if you were not, like myself, and you missed a lot of these cues, you might have been more open to thinking that the scene was meant to be ambiguous. I mean, for better or for worse, Goose did say that she intended a lot of this to be subtle, and this is honestly some of the most subtle writing Jax has had ever. Like me personally, I didn't know the whole egg terminology thing correlated to trans women, and I think that's really cool. I liked learning about it. I will say though, on the commentary of Jax being a cautionary tale about not accepting your transness, it just makes me wonder even more, why not just make the show about him? It probably would have made him more tolerable if the rest of the character's potentials weren't being dangled in our face like a carrot on a stick. But yeah, that's mainly all I have to say about trans Jax. Isn't she lovely? No, she's not. Anyways, tangent aside, after this show is done rage baiting me for like a minute straight with that stupid ass iMovie montage, Pomni gets pulled out of the abstraction by Zubul. Again, I have no idea how any of this is working, but sure. When she's pulled back, she is glitching. And honestly, with how short of a memory this series seems to have, I was surprised that they even remembered that happens when you touch abstractions, so good on you, TADC. After that, they do the second best thing in this finale, and they put Jax on a leash and throw him in a dog kennel. I'm so fucking dead. Maybe this finale wasn't that bad. Earlier on in this episode, Gangle had a line where she wasn't sure if she'd be able to cry for Jax, and I was like, wow, that's great. Victims of abuse do typically feel guilty for not being upset when their abusers die. But then they have her cry anyways, and I get it, that's realistic, but I feel like narratively it'd be so much more potent to have her remain unfeeling towards his death, or at least not crying. Again, don't get me wrong, it's a realistic human thing and that's fine, but narratively, the narrative benefits would have been so much more to have her not cry, in my opinion, to keep that narrative thread of not feeling sorry for your abuser and the complicated emotions that can come with it. I was gonna say this is a nitpick, but considering how unfair this show is to the victims of Jax's abuse, I don't think it is. Anyways, blah blah blah, they're all being happy. Oh my fucking god, Kane's here. Yeah, I fully expected Kane to not be gone, although it's very concerning that he's only showing up with like, what, 20 minutes left in the finale. Oh my god. So after Kane got deleted in episode 8, he wakes up in the void, and that actually makes a lot of sense to me because when you delete stuff off of a computer, it doesn't get perma-deleted right away. It does go straight to recycling. I don't know if that was the intention, but I think it's a pretty cool interpretation, and it makes good use of the void, so I'm not complaining. The first part of this is a very beautiful sequence of Kane reaching a similar red door that Pomni went through in episode 1, and it switches between Kane in the void and imagery of the red dot in the black background that we saw in episode 8. It's all very nice, all very beautiful, but it doesn't tell you much. Kane then breaks down the wall, gets access to the original Scratch's body scan, and then everyone else's body scans, and then also somehow gets connected to Wi-Fi. For the 50th time, I've gotta say, where the hell did that come from? You can't fool me, TADC. I've had enough of shows trying to give me beautiful animation to make me ignore the amount of shit they're pulling out of their ass. Cough cough, Arcane Season 2. Anyways, after scouring twitter.com, Kane then has a little monologue about how he was wrong, you can't control humans, blah blah blah, and here's my thing, right? I can buy Kane being regretful. We see that at the end of episode 8 right before he's deleted. But this level of introspection is just such an asshole. This 8-episode long plight of Kane not being able to understand humans suddenly getting solved because he got 5G network is so insane. And the thing is, looking at it on a surface level, I like his little speech, but it's so unearned that I just can't get past it. Why has Kane come to this conclusion? This finale especially feels like it takes most of its time trying to convince us that the characters have developed instead of, you know, actually developing them. Also, then Kane lets go of Abel, which is also kind of confusing. Does he just leave him to float in the void? Did he kill Abel? Kind of fucked up, Kane. You were the one who cannibalized him and then left him floating in the void. Also, whilst Kane merely got sent to the recycling bin, Bubbles actually got deleted out of existence. Like at the beginning of this entire thing, Kane just stares at an empty bubble. Don't know what the fuck that's about. Anyways, before entering the circus, Kane talks to the moon that he fumbled, which, girl, I would 100% treat you better. Come over to me. But yeah, Kane pulls up, and the only one who has a remotely appropriate response is Zubul. Zubul should have been pro-tag movement live strong, I see. Actually, Zubul is the only one who responds to Kane at this point, which means they're also left to do the mandatory, but it's okay, we're glad you're back thing. Hey, I guess it's still more accountability than Jax ever took. Then the cast basically does one big gotcha reaction to their real world selves because they're just brain scans. Listen, I wasn't into the theory side of TADC, so I don't personally care that Soma Theory was canon. What I do care about is that a show that is supposedly about finding peace in stagnant life doesn't really do much finding peace with the characters, because we barely get any time with them. Throughout this entire finale, the surviving cast's reactions to things have been getting incredibly more and more muted to the point that I don't care. They got their happily ever after, that's great. I don't care about these characters though. And don't get it twisted, you could call me Martha Dunstock with how much I love a happy ending. But I also don't think a happy ending is inherently good just because it's positive. If you don't spend time building up your characters and making us believe in their relationships and their bonds, why should I care? Throughout this entire series, Pomni and Ragatha's conversations have either been entirely awkward or focused on a man. I'm pretty sure the only positive conversation that Gangle has had with anyone that isn't Zubul was with Pomni back in episode 4. Kinger and Pomni do kind of have an established relationship, but other than that, he's just the guy that gives therapy talks. Oh, and occasional lore drops. But do you get my point? A finale like this relies on the chemistry between characters to work, and it just simply does not have that. I am a staunch believer that happy endings are no less mature or well written than sad or bittersweet endings, but the reason a lot of people think they are is because too many people think that it is simple to make a happy ending. Just slap a smile on the characters' faces and it's fine. No, you have to put the effort in, and TADC does not do that. But I guess that's all there is to say about the finale. Oh, also, Gangle's human counterpart is canonically dark-skinned, and she is also the biggest victim of Jax. Coincidence? I think not. JK, it probably is, but I think it's funny. Hi, quick disclaimer, some of the sprites for this part are a bit lagged behind because I messed up whilst editing, so if you see me looking angry or annoyed at a part where it feels like it doesn't really warrant it, that's why. Hopefully it should only be an issue for this section though. God, I spent way more time talking about that finale than I ever should have, but yeah, I guess that's my beat-by-beat analysis of the show in order. Now, obviously, you can tell I wasn't a fan of a lot of things that happened in this show, especially this finale, but I want to clarify. I don't care if you liked it. I have a Danganronpa profile picture. I know Ball when it comes to liking things that are not that well written. My issue is when you guys act flabbergasted when other people think it's not well written. And I'll talk more later about how this fandom is insanely anti-critique, but I just wanted to point out something I found funny about the reactions from people who are vehemently defending episode 9. It's that they're basically split into two camps, one of which is certain that the show is so complex and so emotionally provoking that it's basically on par with Shakespeare, and that anyone who dislikes it is just too much of a simple-minded Neanderthal to comprehend it. And the other is people basically saying, well, it's your fault for expecting the show to be that good. The duality of man. Again, contrary to popular belief, I'm not a mindless hater, and I do want to give this show credit where it's deserved. I think the first 4 episodes are really strong, the animation only gets more and more beautiful as time goes on, and even the episodes that I'm not a fan of still have good aspects to them. Like, I love everything about Kane in episode 8, and even if it didn't end up mattering in the long run, I think the tension build-up of that last scene in episode 7 where Jax presses the button is also really well done. And speaking of Jax, the show got really close to being critical about his abusive behavior in episode 6 when Gangle and Zubul have their talk. Gooseworks is not an inherently bad writer, she's capable of making things work. So it just makes you wonder, why did she fumble? Why even bother to create such a compelling cast if you have no intention of developing them and you just want the entire story to be about one dude? Because it feels like the story would arguably play out much more smoother if you just removed every other character that isn't Jax, turn Pomni into a therapy dog, and just have the whole show be about him exploring his demons. At least then your fans wouldn't be in uproar about who is or isn't the main character. Despite the show making it feel like Jax was the only one who mattered by the end of it, these other characters still exist and still sometimes get occasional importance to the plot. Why, if not to just piss off viewers when they're inevitably shafted? But then it hit me. These characters only exist to be mild parallels to Jax and foreshadow his backstory. Think about it. When Ragatha is talking about her extremely abusive mother, Jax looks guiltily away. Why? Because he also has an abusive mother, and that's what this is foreshadowing. If Gangle has low self-esteem and emotional instability, Jax also has low self-esteem and emotional instability. Zubul has gender identity issues? Well, Jax is also implied to have gender identity issues. Kinger watched his wife abstract as a result of actions he was partially responsible for? Well, you'll never guess what happened to Jax. In retrospect, it feels like episodes 1 to 4 and any character moments we get of anyone who isn't Jax beyond that exist purely to round out Jax's character without actually developing him. Man, I guess this really was our Jax show. I don't know what the pun was supposed to be there. I guess this is the part where I talk about controversies the show has had, but I don't want to talk about the writers or voice actors yet, so I'm gonna keep this contained to fandom discourse. To start off, one of the biggest non-diegetic pitfalls of this show is that Gooseworks won't get the hell off Twitter or Tumblr. I'm so serious when I say, why did no one at Glitch HQ tell her to get a fucking burner? Firstly, I'm already not a fan of when a creator has to confirm something outside of the show constantly. It's one thing if they had restrictions, and I get it, fandoms nowadays, especially younger people, tend to miss things that aren't exactly obvious. But the amount of times Gooseworks has felt the need to clarify something after the fact speaks less about her fandom and more about her ability to storytell. Take the argument of whether or not Jax was the main character, for example. There shouldn't be one, point blank period. If your writing is strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet, there'll never be an argument about this. It's one thing if you intentionally design it to be confusing, but that just isn't the case with this show, and the fact that a very significant portion of fans can be outraged by the fact that this character is taking all the screen time clearly indicates that at some point you messed up in conveying that he was supposed to be the main character. And it's just overall not a good omen to feel like you have to be constantly checked into the creator's social media posts in order to feel like you fully understand the show. I also am just not personally a fan of the whole I might be lying about these characters at any time thing that Gooseworks likes to do, because whilst I already don't consider information that is confirmed non-diegetically to be canon, clearly a lot of fans look to Gooseworks posts for answers, but at any point in time any of them could be blatant lies. It just feels like it makes the fandom a much more hostile place than it needs to be, especially because theory crafting is such a big part of this fandom. It kind of feels like the creator is going, you stupid idiot, you believed me? Fuck you. And then mixing that in with actual answers about your show. Just feels like unnecessary drama and again, extremely unprofessional. I don't think it's a moral failing, I just think it's not that smart. And I know I said it kind of jokingly, but I really do think Glitch needs to invest in PR lessons for its less experienced writers in the future. And whilst we're on the topic of Jax getting an exuberant amount of focus, I think a big portion of that is due to Goose being the only writer on the show. Having other people on that writing team most likely would have meant that different perspectives would have been brought in, and Jax would have been less likely to completely overrun the entire show because someone would have pointed out how underutilized the rest of the cast feels. But because Gooseworks is the only person she really has to refer to, because she loves Jax, she's not gonna see any issue with how the story's unfolding. No matter how good of a writer you are, it's always great to have someone who can look over your shoulder and get any blind spots you missed. Honestly, I think that's just general advice I'd give for anyone who's trying to make a show. I understand the fear of your ideas getting away from you and being diluted with more people on the writing team, but I promise you, the pros will almost always outweigh the cons. Nobody is infallible, but the more perspectives, the better in my opinion. What was I talking about? Alright, Gooseworks being unprofessional. I think it's common consensus at this point that the TADC fandom is really fucking parasocial, and I think a big part of that is because Goose constantly interacts with her fandom. I don't want to victim blame her because she has come out and said them idolizing her makes her uncomfortable, but at the same time, constantly having interactions as the creator of a show, well, it's something a lot of people don't do for a reason. And a prime example of this for me is when Gooseworks replied to a critique post about how Ragatha gets pushed out of the main narrative, and it was overall a very mild-mannered conversation, but it looked like it prompted Gooseworks to delete her account, despite her later clarifying that it was due to an unrelated mental health breakdown. And as a result, the fans went on a really weird humiliation ritual where they self-flagellated themselves for daring to critique this show. And it was so odd because the original thread was still up. Everyone could see how harmless that conversation was, and yet it's like some kind of hypnosis fell over the fandom, making them perceive this as an actually aggravated attack or something. And again, this is more on her fans for being absolutely batshit, but at the same time, I think she needs to take a page out of Book Talk's book, no pun intended, and just not interact with critique spaces, because critique spaces are for fans. When creators start getting involved, it turns awkward. It makes every critique feel like a slight, an insult, or something inherently wrong to say because the creator is right there when critique should never be perceived as that. And I really believe that's why the TADC fandom is so anti-critique. Gooseworks is right there, in a metaphorical sense. So it feels like anytime you say anything negative about the show, well, she's gonna see and she's probably gonna be upset by it. And I guess when you look at it from that perspective, it makes sense why these people become so self-loathing when criticism is brought to the table. Oh my god, we're such an ungrateful fandom. You should literally be lucky to breathe the air that she breathes, and you're criticizing the writing? Ugh, you're so disgusting. We're such a horrible fandom. Honestly, if Gooseworks deleted the show tomorrow, she'd be so justified. We're horrible. And it is the most milquetoast, mild-mannered criticism of a show ever. In the same vein of the fandom being really weird to simple criticisms, they like to act extremely pedantic when you provide the most basic constructive criticism for the show. For example, evidently a lot of people don't like Jax, and most people attribute it to the fact that despite being pretty awful, his actions never really get any consequences. Now a TADC fan will hear that, and in their minds it translates to, I want to see this character get violently beaten up, thus rendering the entire criticism invalid because it is clearly coming from a deeply maladjusted and troubled person. It's not like consequences are kind of the basis of storytelling or anything. It's not like allowing a character to be repeatedly awful with no real acknowledgement from the story without it being a commentary on some sort of societal phenomenon. Puts your story and characters at risk of feeling like nothing matters, especially if it's your quote-unquote main character. It's not, but let's pretend it was. Nah, it's definitely just people wanting to see the purple bunny rabbit get beat up. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and lie to the choir that I'd be against seeing him get beat up, but it's not my narrative issue that he doesn't. My narrative issue is that his actions are treated with such little weight, all in an attempt to make us sympathize with him to the point where it sucks the life out of the story and the characters around him. Everything in this show bends over backwards so that we don't see Jax for the horrible person that he is. Oh, but Jax did face consequences. He died. What more do you want? But this is the thing. Jax dying can't be the result of him being an abusive prick, because the show barely acknowledges he's an abusive prick. Refer to earlier in the video where I talked about how Jax's actions are barely taken seriously by the narrative. No, rather, Jax's death, especially following his traumatic backstory drop, is more of a point of sympathy rather than consequence. And it's not as if those have to be mutually exclusive. It absolutely could have been both a moment of long due comeuppance and a bittersweet what could have been if Jax did accept help. But it isn't, because the show can't decide whether or not Jax abusing the cast is a funny gag gag or genuinely mentally damaging. And it's not as if this is something that is exclusive to Jax. Characters that are babied by the narrative typically end up being at the very least significantly controversial. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well argued out your point is, these people are still gonna treat you like you belong in a madhouse for having a take that isn't entirely positive on the show. And honestly, a lot of this behavior also boils down to just how much the label of indie is tied into the identity of the fandom. In my previous video essay about Vi and Caitlyn from Arcane Season 2, I said that if you want good lesbian representation, you cannot stop people from critiquing the representation we have, because all that does is tell the higher-ups that it's fine for them to put no effort into writing our relationships, since we're clearly just gonna take whatever we can get regardless. The same thing kind of applies for indie animation. I 100% understand wanting to be protective of something that is constantly being stomped on by mainstream industry and being treated as the underdog, but trying to make indie animation spaces anti-critique is unbelievably unhelpful, because all it will do is communicate to other people that indie animation isn't ready to be taken seriously. All mediums, all genres face criticism. Indie animation should not be exempt from that, and arguing that it should be is only arguing that indie animation shouldn't be treated as seriously as anything else. And I thought that was the opposite of what you guys were trying to say. But you know what, let me save how parasocial this fandom is for when I talk about the controversies of this show, because trust me, there are a lot. Oh yay, I can't wait to talk about this show's many controversies as a black person. I'm so excited for this. Talking non-favorably about the cast of TADC on an app where they get glazed to no ends might be an actual death sentence, but you know what? It can't possibly be worse than what I've been dealing with from Caitlyn fans for the past 2 years, right? I mean, they literally called me chicken lover. I'm gonna be so honest, TADC was almost on a legendary generational run of no controversies, and then Glitch announced the theater release and everything fell apart from there. Which honestly, looking back, despite how much outrage it garnered, it truly was the most tamest thing in what would be the sequence of events to follow. I don't think there's much to say about the theater release. At the time, and honestly still now, my stance was, I understand why this is a great step for indie animation, but I also get why people are upset and feel a little caught off guard. And I also thought that it wasn't a great idea marketing wise, but it wasn't so much a moral failing as it was just an odd choice, which I wish I could say for everything that came after it. After the anger from that situation died down, a clip from one of Michael Kovac and Ashley Nichols' old stream resurfaced, which you'll probably know as the infamous Nega incident. There are a lot of bad faith misconceptions going around about this incident, and I strongly believe the blame for that lies in part with both Ashley and Michael desperately trying to downplay what happened here. But before I get into that, let me explain what actually happened first. Once upon a time, Michael and Ashley were streaming when someone joins the chat with a username that kind of sounds like the N-word.
Sure, nigga. We notice you. Always gonna be scared to say the word nigga ever again.
I mean, rightfully so.
I don't know if that was intentional or if it was an accident, because it wasn't just Nega, it had like a full name to it, but whatever. Ashley reads it out and is like, oh wow, that sounds like the N-word, and everyone has a little awkward ha ha ha. If this had been where the situation ended, then Michael and Ashley's apologies not only would have been entirely accurate, I wouldn't have even thought they were warranted. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there and becomes much more than a mere misunderstanding about something that sounded racist. For some godforsaken reason, it gets brought up again later in the stream where someone just writes the word nega on a black t-shirt. And I kid you not, everyone dies laughing for like 2 minutes straight.
God damn it! Keep it alive!
Okay, not. Oh my god!
They also then go on to repeat the word in instances where it's clearly meant to be a substitute for the N-word.
Oh, this matchup is so good! Thank you!
So long, nigga.
Nega versus Uwu was so good.
And this is where I want to clarify one of the misconceptions. They were not saying the short form of negative. You guys like to bring up stuff like nega ska or nega chin. That was never a factor, and you knew that. No one is laughing their asses off at seeing the word negative cut in half. And no one is saying so long negative. especially after establishing how much that word sounds like the N-word. In fact, the only time any person in this stream alludes to negative as a part of the joke is Gooseworks when she hops in and calls a drawing of Angel Nega Angel, which even then is a double entendre. Yes, the color scheme is literally negative, but it's also ha 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 N-word. You know, like what the joke has been for this entire fucking stream. And I think that's the worst part of I'm not touching you racism. It gives you such plausible deniability whilst actively still having the effect as outright explicit racism. It's like being a black kid who's learning Spanish in class and everyone using negro as a way to covertly say the N-word, with all the typical benefits of getting to antagonize a black kid with racism, plus the added bonus of not getting in trouble for it because they're just saying black in Spanish. Or when K-pop idols say the N-word and everyone's like, they're just saying you in Korean. The fuck they are. Surprise, surprise, substituting one word for another changes nothing if you still have the original meaning intended. Harkening back to my favorite analogy, just because I call a door a clock, it's not gonna start telling me the time and it's not gonna stop opening and shutting like a door. In the same vein, just because you spell it N-E-G-A doesn't change from the fact that you're saying N-I-G-G-A. I think the thing that really gets under my skin with this as well is that it's just cowardly. You're being racist, but you're also giving yourself enough room to deny that it was truly in bad faith, which is exactly what happened in this situation, spurred on by the fact that both Michael and Ashley were so manipulative in their apologies. It did not teeter on racist, it wasn't a misunderstanding, and you weren't poking fun at the absurdity of it. You guys were saying the N-word and laughing your asses off over it. Both in your mid-20s, by the way. But, I mean, if you didn't downplay it, how would you get your fans to dick ride you and actively gaslight black people at the same time? I say that, they would have done it regardless. But it's just so cowardly, it's pathetic. Honestly, Michael Kovac slinging the N-word 50 times in a row unambiguously back when he was 14 was way more ballsy than this. Because that's also something he did for some reason.
Yo, the rap music, yo, love the rap music, yo, fuck the rock music, yo, fuck the rap music, yo, the weather suck, crack goes away, back. That is a fact that you gotta know now.
Now, I'd be willing to accept the possibility that he's grown and changed given that this was when he was 14, but this isn't an isolated incident. It was this at 14, then it was Robot Nicolaus, then it was Anne Frank and Goku at 19. I don't know, man. It feels like it gets to a point where it's almost stupid to assume that he's changed because he's shown us no reason to believe he has. He also has consistently throughout the years not given up his pattern of being unable to apologize properly, reducing his actions to goofy, dubious, not so great. Honestly, these people would rather go through a whole thesaurus of synonyms for the word bad before they actually let the word racist slip past their mouths. There's also the state of his DeviantArt, which he claims was hacked, and you're free to believe that. But for me, after your fourth time being caught in some racist controversy, you start to lose a bit of credibility. Thankfully, I think that's the Michael Kovac shit over and done with. After that, there was some drama with the VA of Gangle, Marissa Lenti, having a collaboration with Black Griffin, because the dude was 25 when he met his future wife, who was 15 years old at the time. Allegedly, he says he had a sister bond with her and that she would continuously ask him out, but he only accepted once she turned of age. Stuff like this is exactly why I don't care if something's legal. It can still absolutely be morally fucked up. And I think this is a situation where that rhetoric replies 100%. I don't know why I had this idea that Marissa Lenti retracted her defense of Black Griffin, because I'm looking for it now and I can't find it anywhere, which is concerning. Then there's Sean Chiplock, who used to be in the Genshin fandom and was just basically a massive incel. Like, he was the type of guy who loved to joke about smashing the child characters.
Smash. Just for everyone that was recording.
Because ha ha ha, pedophilia. He also said the N-word, which is great. Hi, me again. So I was doing more research on Sean Chiplock as I was making this video, and this guy is exceedingly weird. I feel like if I were trying to include everything in as much depth as it requires, it would make this video like 2 hours long. So if you want everything about this man, you can go to this account on Twitter. But for now, the most important things that stood out to me were, one, his constant need to joke about being a pedophile, which I don't get it. What's the punchline? Ha ha ha, I'm a grown man calling himself a pedophile? Get help! But also this now deleted tweet, which was allegedly his response to the whole Tignery VA situation, which, if you don't know, one of the Genshin VAs had to be replaced because he had allegations of engaging in sexual misconduct with children. Why would this ever be your response? I don't know, put this man on the list or something, bro. Beyond that, I don't think any of the other voice actors have gotten into hot water since. That's not to say the creator didn't, though. When it comes to Gooseworks, there is A lot to the point where I really can't be bothered to repeat it all word for word because I've already made a compilation about everything that's come out about her. So why not just play that TikTok video for you guys instead? You guys have fun. I'm gonna take an ice pop break because it is absolutely scorching where I am right now. I'm gonna have an aneurysm. Let's move on. Now onto Gooseworks' tweets, which are kind of a mixed bag. Because I'll be honest, as much as I still feel weird about them, I can understand the whole, oh, it was just them being edgy, it was a long time ago, if these were isolated incidents. But it's not. It's one person repeatedly making these very weird, off-putting, quote-unquote jokes. It's about the holistic picture, right? Like, take the Nazi thing. I don't think that's Gooseworks actually declaring that she's a Nazi. I think it's a very in poor taste, edgy joke. But the fact that she's constantly making these types of jokes does make me look at her differently. Same thing with the incest jokes. One off, okay, whatever. Multiple times, constantly having incest as a punchline of your jokes? I don't know, man. And honestly, the incest jokes get even weirder when you consider Goose's past pro-fic posting on her Tumblr, but we'll get onto that later. As for some other tweets, we have the old Goose joking about being racist because she's not playing Japanese characters, which again, I just personally think that's not her joke to make. In the same way, would it be my place to make a joke about not playing trans characters because I'm cis and transphobic? Like, I don't know, that's just very weird to me. There's no ha 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 punchline there. And of course, her getting upset that people are drawing a character that is literally based on a black man with darker skin. She almost tries to save it with also asking why people are drawing another character with lighter skin, but honestly, out of all of the so-called jokes here, this has to be the funniest one because it just makes me imagine Goose freaking the fuck out these past 3 years seeing people draw Jax as black before he was confirmed to be Asian. On the topic of Goose's humor, a lot of it seems to be based in very, oh, you guys are so sensitive nowadays, such snowflakes. I mean, God, just looking up SJW on her Twitter is a mindfuck and a half, which if you don't know, SJW is basically another word for woke, someone who's socially progressive, and it's just confusing to me because Goose, you're trans. I'm not saying I've never heard of a self-hating queer person, it just boggles my mind when people actively invest in ideologies that go against them, but I guess we wouldn't have gays for Trump if people like that didn't exist. Post-editing Digi here, 2 tweets I forgot. One, her making a joke about it being everyone's dream to groom Mr. Beast. I don't know what tweet she's replying to as it's been deleted, but I can't fathom a context in which this is just not insanely creepy. And 2, honestly, one of her more disturbing tweets where she jokes about replacing Shadman, which if you don't know who Shadman is, he's a pedophile who draws porn of real life children. And to make it worse, this was quite recently after he got arrested for assault. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the humor. And hopefully the last thing in regards to her tweets are her rather misogynistic tweets. Now, again, I want to remind you guys, this is less about the tweets itself and more about the context surrounding them. Had it not been for the way she writes her characters and the fact that these were so repetitive, I could probably look past them as some kind of sarcasm. But because that simply isn't the case, they feel more and more like a projection of her own internalized misogyny. And again, I really just want to hammer home how important I think it is to look at this in a holistic manner. These are a pattern of behaviors I think it is absolutely valid to question someone's morals over. And don't worry, I already hear you, Digi, these are so long ago. Well, first of all, I don't think that time is inherently indicative of change, especially if you're making those kind of quips whilst you're an adult. But also, even if I did believe that, Gooseworks herself is the one who keeps on pushing this idea that she's still super edgy, and that if her drafts got leaked, she'd lose her job, and she'd get cancelled and all that stuff. Like, if there's anyone to blame for people not believing she's changed, it's herself. Now, for last, but surely not least, is her inappropriate conversations with minors. I said this in my recent video discussing, but I want to clarify one more time. The screenshots I'm about to show you don't necessarily make Gooseworks a groomer or a predator, but they are concerning and possibly the most important thing to take out of all of this. I have talked about this more at length in my recent video, but to just summarize it quickly, Gooseworks would interact with someone who I assume was a follower of them in a casually sexual manner. It wasn't in DMs, it was out in the public. This person would make sexual fan art of their OC, Gooseworks would make sexual jokes to them, which I already think it's a bit dangerous to interact with people like that without checking their age, but whatever. When Gooseworks finds out that this person is 17, she still continues to interact with them in that manner. Mind you, Gooseworks is about 26, 27 at the time. No matter what you feel about this woman, it is very concerning that someone who is pushing 30 at the time cannot discern what isn't an appropriate interaction with someone who's almost a decade younger than them. There was also a situation where Gooseworks offended someone who is 17 going on 18, making extremely sexual jokes towards someone who just turned 14. Now, this is the part where I really need to emphasize, it is very serious to levy predator, groomer allegations against someone, especially a trans woman. That is not what I'm intending to do, but I cannot sit here and act like this is not a concerning pattern of behavior that I'm noticing. Oh yeah, I said I was going to talk about Gooseworks being vaguely pro-fic on Tumblr before. I do believe the blog is deleted now, but on their old Tumblr blog, they were just one of those, oh, if you think fiction affects reality, then blah blah blah, you don't deserve rights, blah blah blah. And they also had a really bad habit of posting extremely, hell, who am I kidding, borderline softcore porn of Ryoko from Kill la Kill, who I'm pretty sure is a teenager. And I get it, the show itself is extremely sexualized. A lot of anime has fan service of teenagers, unfortunately. I mean, for God's sakes, take Danganronpa for an example. They have plenty of weird fan service. For God's sakes, they even do it with the child characters. But most people who are into the games completely despise that and are disgusted by it. Just because it's in the game doesn't mean you're any less weirder for engaging in it, if that makes sense. Same thing with the show, in my opinion. And the character looks really young in all of these fan arts. It's just so off-putting. But yeah, I believe those are all the controversies I have covered in regards to Gooseworks. You notice as the video piles on, it's more about the quantity of these instances. Again, some of them you'd think would be fine in isolation, but the fact that they've happened so frequently, yeah, it's very weird. But hey, I can't tell you what to think. I'm just here to compile the evidence and give you my opinion. Hi, I'm back. Actually, I'm sorry, I lied. I didn't go anywhere. Anywho, horrible audio aside, that basically sums up everything to do with Gooseworks, but I still have a few more things to say, especially on that interacting with a minor part. I want to clarify, I do not think Gooseworks is some dangerous predator. I know that those are serious allegations to levy against a trans woman. I think she's irresponsible, in a way that can be perceived as concerning, but I don't think she's a groomer and I don't think she's a pedophile. I'll get more into how we allow marginalized identities to dictate how we treat people, whether we're defending them or whether we're against them, later in the video, but I just desperately needed to clarify none of the behavior I've mentioned here has anything to do with Goose being trans, and if you believe it does, get the fuck off my page. Transphobes are disgusting lowly scum. Nuff said. Anyways, it's one thing to make a joke like this once or twice when you're young, dumb, stupid, edgy, whatever, but the consistency of it is really, really grating. I think the worst part when it comes to Gooseworks and her past bigotry is that she just refuses to acknowledge it. Despite, in my opinion, being entirely manipulative and leaving out important context, at the very least, Michael and Ashley apologized. Gooseworks, despite very much being there and also saying the N-word in that stream, just kept quiet. I actively remember watching her quote retweets quickly fester into extremely anti-black rhetoric as a lot of her fans began treating black people like they were delusional little warmongers because we don't like racism. I kid you not, it actually felt like reading the comments on a Facebook post from my MAGA mom or something. That's right, Sharon. You stand up against those woke blackies. Don't let them take our right to humor from us. Ha ha ha. And we all know Gooseworks is chronically online. She absolutely was aware of the situation and actively made the choice to ignore it because it probably wasn't that important to her. I don't think she would have said anything if the situation didn't explicitly bleed into real life with camera proof, which, oh yeah, that also happened.
Yo, it's my nigga! What's up, nigga?
Everyone was insisting that this massive controversy of a bunch of white people saying the N-word was a nothing burger, and then another non-black guy did it in real life who was spurred on by the voice actors, and people were still saying that it was a nothing burger and it wasn't related to the very thing he was spurred on by. You can't win with these people. But yeah, it was only then when Gooseworks decided to speak up and say, hey, if you're using genuine racism to defend me, you should go kill yourself, which, great and wonderful brave statement, doesn't really acknowledge the part she had to play in any of this. It's also really telling that she says genuine racism because I'm sure her and a lot of other white people perceive her own bigotry and the rest of the cast's bigotry as some sort of lesser form of racism, which really just reinforces just how little people understand racism. It's a system. Every instance of racism bleeds back into that system. There is no lesser form of racism. Anyways, quick sidebar, whilst we're talking about the Plain Rock situation, I just want to mention that whilst that was the only instance recorded, a lot of black people actually reported having similar instances at TADC events, to the point where someone actually reached out to me to give their experience at a TAD Expo, and it is just horrific. To summarize, it was a lot of white people calling them the N-word. Someone actually called their black friend who is cosplaying as Jax, nigga Jax. Oh, sorry, nega Jax. And whilst I'm not, and at the end of the day, I know you can't control your fan base's actions, you can't make them do anything, but everyone who was involved in this initial situation holds some responsibility, either for their downplaying or for the outright refusal to acknowledge it. It's no secret at this point that after this entire situation, the TADC fanbase became an extremely unsafe place for black people, and whilst any of these people could have spoken up for their black fans, they decided to just ignore it. Or if you're Michael Kovac, try and cool the heat on your back by guilt tripping about how you're getting quote-unquote harassed. And whilst everyone's having conversations about change and growth, this here is a proof to me that nothing has changed about any of these people's behavior. Even the tiniest bit of empathy for their black fans could have reduced how rancidly racist this fandom became by like 20%, but no. Now we're stuck with people saying that TADC releasing is more important than Juneteenth. Ha ha ha. I know it's rage bait, but why am I still angry? No joke though, even I myself have been on the receiving end of a lot of vile racism because of how parasocial this fandom is, and I think the worst part about this is how a lot of people use Gooseworks' transness to act as if they're advocating against transphobia when really they're advocating in favor of racism. For example, recently on my TikTok, there's been this person consistently leaving comments on my page about how they fantasize of me getting ripped to shreds by alt-right extremists because apparently my calling out of Gooseworks' past bigotry is transphobic. Do you guys see why that one picture was getting spammed everywhere? A lot of you think that your queerness exempts you from being racist. And a lot of you extremely unfairly are grouping black people's discomfort with racism as transphobia. And I don't want to be entirely apathetic. I understand where their mindset comes from. I understand why people become hesitant to call out people from marginalized groups because I know how quickly calling them out becomes an excuse to justify bigotry towards them. Hell, I used to, and still do to some extent, get nervous when I'm calling out a black person because I know how quickly quickly people are going to use it as a reason to be racist. But it still has to be done. It's not fair to other oppressed people to act as if one marginalized group is above criticism because you're scared of what the backlash will be. That's kind of the whole point of intersectionality. And again, white queers have been proving that they really struggle to understand that. Anyhow, I don't think there's much more I have to say on that front. In conclusion, this fandom is extremely anti-black, which is 100% a reflection of the creators and voice actors on the show, and queerness has never and will never be a reason why someone can't be racist. I guess I'll end this segment out with a fun fact. In terms of writers and voice actors, Glitch has employed more racist white people than they have black people at all. In conclusion, the amazing Digital Circus probably should have stuck with its original moniker of just Digital Circus because it turns out it was anything but amazing. What, you thought I was actually gonna have some deep, introspective, conclusive segment here? The video's already an hour long, leave me alone. Real talk though, I don't have much more to say. I feel like I've spoken at length already, and I know the second I post this I'm gonna think of something I should have said, but who cares? I mean, if this really didn't satisfy you, I already have a bajillion videos on my TikTok talking about this show, so surely that'll do it. But I know I have to post this now, otherwise it will never leave my storage. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I still don't have an outro, bye.